Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. Hope everyone's doing good. So there's been some cool things happening lately. This Friday, my band Quantum will be playing at Hey Sailor, which is pretty much the best venue around here in the Mid Coast. We'll be opening up for the Button Men, which is a pretty fabulous electro dance group from Portland, Maine. Wally from the Mallet Brothers, formerly of the Mallet Brothers. Super cool guy, highly, highly creative, uh, amazing group, super funky, super danceable. So super excited about playing and opening up for them at 7 o'clock this Friday at Hey Sailor. So come on by if you're around. It should be a fun time. And the other thing that's cool about the event is it's not DJing per se. It's going to be, or it's not DJing at all. It's going to be a night of all original music. So often it happens with electronic music. If your name is attached to an electronic project, people always assume that you're a DJ, or that you're playing other people's music or what have you. And it's it's really not that. It's kind of like, I don't know, equivalent to most of the time, like, say, any band with a guitar or bass or traditional instruments. It's like saying every time I hear of that kind of thing or see that kind of thing, that's a cover band. Like, and it's it's not attached to rock and roll bands that way as it is to people in the electronic world. Like, people always automatically assume that you're DJing and that you're playing other people's music. It's a funny thing. But anyway, so very excited about that. If you're around, come on by. And we did a big show on Film Fanatic on Sunday, and the video's been up for a day or two, actually one day, with a really awesome guest, Dr. Heather Beers. We did a really awesome show where we just kind of took a deep dive into Barbie, the Barbie movie that came out in 2023. It was directed by Greta Gerwig. Very cool movie. I was very surprised by how much I liked it, and interested in seeing it again. It's got a lot of depth, and there's a lot of layers to that movie. So we had a lot to talk about, and she was a fabulous guest. And I uploaded that show yesterday. We recorded the show on Sunday. I think it was Sunday. Yeah, it was Sunday, and then I uploaded it yesterday. Today's Wednesday, so check it out if you get a chance. It was a lot of fun, and again, I've said many times in the past, doing those kinds of segments on Film Fanatic, that's my favorite part of the show, is doing that. And I have another show in probably about a week's time or so. There'll be another interview segment coming up. I have a couple of guests lined up, so stay tuned for that. I'm going to be doing a little bit of a review of the project that these guests worked on that is very cool and interesting, and it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be coming up probably by the end of the week. Today is Wednesday, and by the end of the week, I will have a review on that movie. Or it's not even a movie; it's like a comedy skit. But stay tuned for that. That will be coming up soon, and then I will be doing an interview segment probably next week with the creators of that show. So yeah, some cool things happening here on Film Fanatic. And again, I always love, want to always welcome aboard the new subscribers to the channel, and which has been great. It's been a nice little steady influx of some new people joining in on the fun. And I love when people are commenting on the videos, and that's been happening pretty consistently. That's a real uh, allure for, or a real attractive thing for me to as to why I do this channel. And as to what keeps me interested and kind of inspired is, people giving me feedback or people being excited about movies like I am. So today's show is on a movie that I just saw. I actually went on Monday and saw this in the theater, and that is the first Omen. It just opened this past weekend. It was directed by Akasha Stevenson, and it came out. It opened on Friday. This is the first movie directed by Akasha Stevenson. It is a pretty much a prequel to the Omen franchise. So this show is going to be about my experience and my thoughts. I kind of wanted to wait a few days before I did the review just to kind of live with the movie. I've had a lot of different thoughts about this movie. Some really good positive things and then also some pretty negative things. So I kind of wanted to wait a few days for it to kind of, resonate with my thoughts. I wanted to kind of sit with my thoughts for a little while and let it simmer for a little bit. I was going to do the show. I was going to do a show on this movie, a review on this movie sooner, but I kind of wanted to wait, and so it's been a few days. So I think I'm ready to talk about it for what it's worth. So in preparation for this movie, one thing I've been doing lately when I've been going to the movies is I have been watching the movies that came before it, because that's I don't know, it's kind of a new normal thing where there's so many franchises now, there's so many prequels, sequels, you have it. Like, it seems like everything that's coming out is in that kind of mode. Which, again, sequels and franchise, that's not anything new, but it seems now in 2024 or within the last few years or the last 10 years, it's a regular occurrence. Like, it happens all the time. And, again, at face value, when I look at that, I kind of wish, as a fan of movies, and especially of original content or original movies, original stories, I wish it wasn't such a common thing as it is now. I wish there was more standalone movies coming out where I'm going to see a movie and it's onto itself. It's its own original universe. There are some great movies that have been coming out, but it just seems like it's more and more it's rare. Everything is in this kind of setting. So that being said, because that's been the case, I have been watching the movies in a particular trilogy or the movies that came before, and what have you. And so what I did for the Omen, I watched the original the other night before. I actually watched it on, I think it was Saturday night before I went to go see it on Monday or Sunday night. And the original is such a classic, starring Gregory Peck. And I'm going to be doing a review for that film. I think it's definitely one of the classic horror movies that came out in the 70s, my favorite decade. It's an incredible movie. That movie, I find, it's a pretty shocking movie. There's certain sequences in that movie, in the original, that always kind of scared me. The main sequence where one of the characters hangs herself, I remember as a kid seeing that movie, and it just scared the shit out of me, and it just creeped me out. It really freaked me out as a kid. And so that movie's always had a certain resonation with me. And again, I think it's a classic horror movie, old school horror movie from the 70s, my favorite decade. And it's got this real rawness to it. It's got just practical effects. It's a little bit dated, but I think in all the good ways. And it's a great movie. The rest of the franchise in the Omen universe, I feel that all of those movies are just either just completely forgettable or somewhat decent. I'm not really a fan of the other movies in the franchise. I think there are four movies altogether, but the first one is the only one that I go back to, and I have a really great edition of that, and I will be doing a review for that at some point. So I was really skeptical on this idea. When I first saw the trailer for the first Omen, I thought, okay, this looks like, I don't know, it looks okay. It looked okay, and I didn't really know much about it. And I saw the trailer in the theater, and so fast forward a few weeks or a couple of months, I heard some serious buzz about this movie, and that this movie was going to be a prequel to how the main character in The Omen kind of came about. Damien, the Antichrist. It was it was going to be about his origins, or I should say more so his where he came from. So I thought, okay, and I heard a lot of buzz about the movie. There was a couple of people that I follow online, in particular, the main guy that I listen to for newer movies, Chris Stuckman, and he really raved about this movie. He really said that this movie is, just a classic modern day horror film. Like, it's generally scary, generally creepy, uh, really fresh, and really suspenseful. And Chris Stuckman, again, I pretty much agree with all of his reviews. I have discovered lots of newer, cool movies that might have gone under the radar for me. And so about 95% of the time, I find myself, it's pretty spot on. So I was excited. I got really excited, and I was really not very excited initially. I was like, okay, I don't know. I don't know. I'm kind of indifferent to it when I first heard about it or when I first saw the trailer. But after seeing this review, and I had heard a few other people talk about this film, a couple of friends that I know, and then a few other YouTube people that I follow, but it was mainly Chris Stuckman. And so I went the other night to see this movie, the first Omen, and I think this movie is overall very, very good on a lot of in a lot of ways. It it's also the debut of Akeisha Stevenson, and this movie has um, a really great way of really putting you in the 70s. It definitely is a period piece. The storyline takes place in 1971, and visually, aesthetically, the music, the cinematography, the way this film is presented is really engaging, and I found myself really into this film. I went with my friend Erin Kirkpatrick to this movie, and she had never seen the Omen, the original, or any of the Omen movies. So I was really interested to see what she thought of the movie, because if the movie really hits and is very good, you know it should be its own standalone thing. It should still have that impact. It should still, if it's a good movie, it shouldn't matter, you know, if you knew the mythology. You shouldn't have to. A good movie is a good movie at the end of the day. Obviously, there are things in the universe, franchises and prequels and all these things, reimaginings that sometimes it's very helpful if you know about the lore or the mythology of a certain world that's been established or is established. But at the end of the day, a good movie should be a good movie, and you should just be engaged and lose yourself in that experience for those couple hours. And I had seen an interview with Arkasha Stevenson, and I was really engaged. I thought she gave this really interesting interview. I was like, okay, I'm sold on this. So that was another reason why I went to go see it. And again, it feels like a 70s movie, especially the first act. And I found myself really into this movie. It had a real classic 70s vibe. It was very slow, but in a good way. It was very suspenseful, extremely atmospheric. The characters were pretty fantastic, and there were a few moments where there were jump scares, if you will. And in all honesty, by the time it got to the third or fourth jump scare, if you will, I kind of felt like it wasn't as impactful, and it was a little bit too predictable. It kind of got a little bit by the third or fourth kind of jump scare, if you will. It sort of felt like it was a little bit ham-handed. I don't know it, but I was still engaged because I thought the characters really interesting. This was about the origins of where Damien's character comes from. And then eventually in this movie they get into the meat and potatoes of the movie of going into that and kind of explaining what happened to Damien's mother. In the original, they do go into it. They do go into the mysterious circumstances of who Damien's mother is, but they don't really lay it out for you. They keep it kind of ambiguous. You get this sense that something really bad happened. That there could be some dark forces involved, but it's not really spelled out. You're not really given the answer per se. And in hindsight, in this movie, they do lay it out. They do present what happened in the storyline, like specifically. And I thought, okay, it is very cohesive. It does make sense. It is kind of intriguing. But I have to say too, my reaction to that is, well, I like not really knowing. In regards to the first Omen, I like not really knowing definitively what that is about. His Damien's mother's demise, or how Damien came about into this world. I like that film kept it a little bit ambiguous and that you don't really know. You can kind of more or less make your own conclusions. And they do indicate that there are, perhaps, a various things that had happened to her, or as to her dark origins. They do indicate that, but you don't get a definite answer. And I kind of like that I don't know fully what that's about. So that's one thing. And again, I thought they did a good job with trying to explain it with this prequel. I thought they did a good job with it. On paper it makes sense. It's pretty interesting. But I don't know. At the end of the day, I like not really having it fully known to me. I like that mystery around it, even though they do hint at certain things. So, and I thought when it got to the third or fourth jump scare, it got a little bit predictable. And also when they do go into the heart of, the explanation in regards to Damien's mother, and there is the plot reveal, I feel like it did get, it started to get kind of predictable, And I thought right around the time when they had the fourth or fifth jump scare, if you will, the film suddenly didn't really feel like a 70s film anymore. It felt like a very modern film. It felt all of a sudden you were in 2024. Even though it's a period piece, it just felt like it started introducing the more kind of modern ways of how we see horror films. The pacing, and also the use of effects, and all things, kind of the tropes of how you see, how a lot of newer horror films are made. So it kind of lost a little bit of that 70s magic for me. And again, these are little nitpicking things. They're not like overtly bad or terrible that necessarily took me out of the movie because, again, all up until that point, I thought this movie was really great, very creepy. I love the slow pace. It's a slow burn, very atmospheric. The music, the score was incredible. The cinematography was amazing. Had a lot of suspense. But I did honestly feel when those things happened, it kind of took me out of the movie a little bit. Um, and by the time you get to the third and fourth act, or I should say the conclusion, there were there were two major things that kind of took me out of the movie, and I felt like it overall kind of ruined the movie for me. And I felt like, well, at face value, I thought the ending to this movie was, you know, utterly ridiculous and totally unneeded. I felt like they did this. The ending was structured this way because, again, that this is my first impression, but I felt like the ending was tacked on to this movie due to studio pressure. To and it was totally left open to where they can or she can make another sequel to this movie. And I thought it totally flew in the face and was a total violation of what the first movie laid out. It basically said that some of the biggest points of the first Omen didn't happen. And I thought the ending for this movie was utterly ridiculous. And it totally, went against, again, it went against everything that was kind of established for the original. And it was, I recently watched a review of this movie, and one of the guys was talking about The Last Demeter, which was a vampire movie that came out, which was based on based on Bram Stoker's the Bram Stoker's novel, and they basically took the chapter in Bram Stoker's novel about Dracula's travels to England on the Last Demeter. And this guy was talking about that movie, and he made some certain comparisons of where the ending really was just there were some real terrible choices, and that became a thing of where it just took him and took me when I saw that movie. The ending was so bad that it just it kind of ruined the whole experience for me. To where it was this total reimagining, and it did not have any cohesiveness to the original story. And all it did was just the studio trying to milk this movie, and they're telling you that they're going to make a sequel no matter what. And I felt that's what happened with the first Omen, unfortunately. I think it, especially if it, with the first Omen, it is centered on the origins of Damien's arrival into the world and his mother. So they systematically changed everything around that and kind of tagged on this in comparison to the original, tagged on this kind of happy ending. And it was like, why was that needed? And I thought again, very similar in some ways to The Last Demeter, where The Last Demeter had some really great things going for it. But the last act, the plot reveal, the monster reveal, and the reimagining of the ending was so bad that it just took me out of the movie. And that also happens with the first Omen, where the demon or the devil, if you will, is revealed, and it's just terrible CGI, and it was so poorly handled, and it just felt like it didn't make any sense in regards to the original movie, and it just, again, and I will have to say it was bad enough to where it took me out of the movie, and I was really surprised because this movie has copious amounts of violence. I think this movie does take some real chances. It is a pretty gruesome movie, and I feel like it has this unhinged kind of thing to it where, you know, they took some chances with this movie for in all the good ways. So I'm not sure why, you know, they took these really cornball they or I should say why they took these, kind of ham-handed approaches, and it just felt like and also these really cliched studio approaches to kind of tell the audience, oh, there's going to be another one. We're going to make another one. Hopefully, this will make enough money, and we'll make another one. But the first act, the second act, and most of the third act, you're getting something new and fresh, and where they're pushing the envelope. So I feel like the last act of this movie, the conclusion, the big plot reveal or reveals, I felt like the studio totally interfered in this movie to turn this into to turn this movie into an even bigger franchise. That's my impression, and to me it was very obvious that the filmmakers had pressure on them, and suddenly there were other cooks in the kitchen making these decisions. And at face value, that's kind of my opinion of this movie. And it's interesting. There was another person I've been who I watched who reviewed this movie. Another reviewer who I respect his opinions. He really really raved about this movie, and he said that the ending was, he really criticized the ending, but he felt for him the movie was so good that it outweighed that. And he even made this kind of ridiculous comment, which I think is kind of ridiculous in hindsight, where he was saying that this movie was kind of a masterpiece, but if when he watches it again, or maybe eventually buys it, he's not going to watch the ending because the ending was so bad. And I'm just like, how can you do that to yourself? That's ridiculous. But anyway, for me, I have to say that the ending and some of these choices towards the end of this film overall ruined the experience for me. And it's just, it got a little bit lost. Especially, and it was interesting watching the first Omen and then going to see this new one. Jump scares have been around in horror films for so long, but it felt like when I watched the original, and again, the 70s, that's my favorite decade for films, and especially horror films. Jump scares have been around forever, like that's a thing, and because on one part, they're used because it does work, but then it's so used and it's so telegraphed now in films that it doesn't lose its impact. It loses its impact. And there are scenes like that, if you want to call it jump scares, in the Omen, or like for another example would be The Exorcist. But it doesn't. It's not like, I don't know. It's not like, it never feels like it's the method of like paint by numbers. Like, here you go, here's your ticket, or here's the next one, and then a buzzer goes off, and then that's the jump scare. It doesn't feel predictable. Like when there are moments in the first one where there are quote unquote jump scares, it just feels more natural, more organic. It doesn't feel like it's being like it's not. The scares don't feel formulaic. And it seems in newer horror films, when you have these scenes of where the audience is supposed to be frightened, it feels like it's now a formula, and you can see it coming. And then when it's or when it's being slowly presented to you that this is the moment where there's going to be that scare, it's set up in such a way that you can see it coming a mile away. Whereas like the traditional horror films, like The Omen, for instance, the old school ones, there isn't that. It just kind of happens organically and happens naturally, and there isn't this like, okay, here we go, folks. There isn't someone like waving a flag like, okay, this is where you should be scared. There isn't that. So I don't. And I think what now happens in modern horror films is there is that. There's those jump scares are little markings that a lot of these producers and directors are using in horror films as a almost like this weird algorithm thing of where they gotta throw in five jump scares in the first half of the movie and maybe put in 10 total throughout the movie and break it up so it gets those key points, and it's like done in this very analytical way to reach to what they feel will connect with an audience. And the old school mentality of creating horror films, no, it's just about the story. The story will, kind of augment those things already. It wasn't methodical as far as when to put this here and that there because it's going to appeal to this demographic. And it feels like that's what happens with horror films now. So I think that was a factor in my experience with watching the first Omen of why I felt, okay, I feel disconnected with this movie. Overall, I think this movie is very good, and it's very well directed. But I can't, I can't help but think of these examples as to like how now I feel where it did take me out of the movie, and it did really. Take me out of that world building that was or the world that was so established, especially in the first act. So yeah, it's a mixed bag. It's a mixed bag. And I think this movie has moments of greatness. I do. But you know, it unfortunately has some for my money, unfortunately, I think it has some pretty bad flaws, especially the ending, which I think the ending is just terrible. And so, you know, and that's why I kind of waited a few days to kind of sit with this movie, to sit with my thoughts with this movie before I decided to talk about it. But overall, I recommend this movie, but I don't know if I would say go see it in a theater or I don't know. Rent it maybe when it comes out, but overall I was kind of disappointed. You know, and but there are moments of real greatness in this film, so it's a mixed bag. So this is Jason Dean of Film Fanatic. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.